Sabbath turned up in the late 60s. They've evolved out of a blues rock band, very sort of, I think they were called Earth. But by the time they become Black Sabbath and they've gone in to record that first album, I mean, they were just creating a raw, youthful, angry, energetic kind of rock music, which was a perfect blueprint for what heavy metal would become.
The whole thing derived from the British blues scene of the mid-60s, which was the kind of music that really grabbed me and my contemporaries.
I think when the 60s were ending and the peace and love had evaporated, we were looking at a new decade, and Black Sabbath certainly tried very hard to give us a soundtrack for that.
Did Black Sabbath invent heavy metal?
Of course they didn't invent heavy metal.
No.
Yes.
Yeah, I think Sabbath probably did invent heavy metal.
I think Black Sabbath, you could say, actually were one of the first real heavy metal bands.
It's become such a figure of debate over the last 40 years as to the genesis and birth of the whole movement and environment and how far you can trace it back. But to me, Black Sabbath were the first true heavy metal band.
I think probably Black Sabbath invented heavy metal with the song Black Sabbath.
Can we say that Sabbath invented heavy metal? Well, you know, if you say that to Ozzy, he gets very upset because he hates the term heavy metal. I'm not sure the rest of the band particularly enamoured by the words heavy metal, but I suppose it's a band that it's definitely that terminology is affixed to.
No, Black Sabbath certainly did not invent heavy metal, but my God, they capitalised on it.
I think they took the medium and really honed it, and very early on made it work, probably better than anyone else had ever made it work.
When they turned up, they certainly moved the whole musical genre on tenfold.
As a concept of heavy, dark music, certainly Black Sabbath were the very first in the field, really.
They invented a style of music that was probably heavier and quite probably louder than was going around the circuit at that time.
They invented their own sound, without a doubt.
I think where they had their greatest popularity was the fact that you could quite easily copy them. They weren't virtuosi as such. They came up with an entry-level brand of music that obviously got more complicated, but set the template for a lot of other bands to follow. If you listen to the first album, Black Sabbath, you can hear a band that's creating its sound, that's putting the building blocks together.
What was unique about Sabbath's sound was that it would probably have scared the hell out of everyone when they heard it back in the day.
Compositionally, particularly with Tony Iommi and his very creative way of coming up with endless numbers of riffs and other musical structures that are often put together in quite an interesting and different way.
The unique thing about the Sabbath sound, and it always has been through all the ages, is Tony Iommi's guitar sound.
Iommi's power chords. I mean, this man just conjured up riff after riff after riff.
Tony Iommi sort of refined all the different things that he liked. I mean, he rather like Richie Blackmore in a way. He liked classical music and he listened to jazz and sort of and the blues, but pared it all down into his style and sort of flowered in Black Sabbath. But he was always quite a technical player as well.
I'm just a guitar player that wants to play, and whatever would be something that people would say, well, is unique to me, it would probably be the sound and maybe just the way I approach it, but how it is, I don't know. To explain yourself is quite difficult.
He's quite keen on guitar technique, and that was sometimes a bone of contention between him and the rest of the band if the guitar became too dominant, too overpowering.
Some people say my love can't be true. My love, and I'll show you. I will give you those things, those are real.
One of the aspects of Black Sabbath that is highly identifiable and original and unique is, I am told, and I think I recall the story from the man's mouth himself, Tony Iommi lost the top of his fingers on one hand.
Obviously was very despondent after the accident happened, and you know, sort of sat at home, you know, this was just a part-time job to finance my guitars, and you know, my career is in music, and suddenly you're missing the two tips of your diddling hand, and that is the official terminology for that. And he was, as I say, you know, he was very despondent, probably in great despair, to be honest. And apparently the manager from the factory came around with a Django Reinhardt album, stuck it on, played it, and said, well, what do you think of that? And he goes, well, you know, it's brilliant. He says, well, that guy can only play with 2 fingers, so what's the matter with you? Get on with
I got a squeezy bottle, melted it down, made it into a ball, got a hot soldering iron and made a sort of hole in it, and got it down to fit my finger. So I got this big ball on the end of my finger. Then I sat there all night, filing it down with some sandpaper to make a shape of a thimble. Then I put some leather on it because it wouldn't grip otherwise. It was plastic, it'd just slip off the string. I put some leather on, which made something like this, which is a plastic and then leather on it. And I used that and off I went.
The song Black Sabbath, you hear the graveyard bell, there's a peal of thunder, and in we go with a 3-note guitar riff that's probably entered the annals of rock, and quite rightly.
There's extraordinary effects on the beginning of Black Sabbath, the wind and the chimes and the sort of spooky flavour to it all, which was actually their producer's idea. It wasn't the group's idea at all, but that was set the seal on what Black Sabbath was, how they were perceived as this very sort of dark, macabre kind of band.
6 minutes 37 seconds, starts off with rain, bells, thunder, and just goes into one of the most classical, unique pieces of heavy music you'll ever hear.
Black Sabbath, again, was done by just me coming up with a riff and playing it sort of loud. And as well.
The song Black Sabbath, the title track from their first album. If you had to talk about the birthplace of heavy metal, this song definitely is a big contributing factor.
If you want to know about heavy metal, just listen to the title track of the first Black Sabbath album, Black Sabbath itself. That encapsulates everything about heavy metal. The ominous sound effects, the doomy, grinding rhythm, the powerful, passionate, rollicking, rolling lead guitar.
The riff is absolutely terrifying. And it really is a scarier riff. It could have been in The Exorcist. It's that scary.
Funnily enough, that's a flattened fifth that Tony Iommi's playing, and I bet he didn't realise that in medieval churches was definitely a no-no. it had a satanic quality to it and satanic implications.
The lyrics just scare the life out of you. What is this that stands before me? And you're like, oh. And the way Ozzy sings it with this menacing intent.
Black Sabbath, by Black Sabbath, from Black Sabbath, and it should be on the Black Sabbath label. I mean, there's not many bands that can do that. You know, your title song is the same as your band, the same as your album title. It's magic, mate, magic.